All right, all right. Welcome to the Music EdQuity chat show. This is a show for music educators to go beyond the surface, to have deeper conversations about how we all can reimagine music education to be diverse, inclusive, and culturally responsive for all of our students. My name is Ashley Cuthbertson. I'm your host of the EdQuity chat show. I'm also a music educator and the founder and CEO of A. Cuthbertson Consulting. We're an educational consulting firm that specifically supports music educators in centering equitable and culturally responsive practices in their curriculum and instruction so they can build and maintain high quality music programs where all of our young musicians thrive. And tonight, I am so excited. I cannot tell you. I've been waiting for this episode for months since I knew that we were going to do it. But to have one of my very closest friends to be on the show, James Dorsey. And we're going to chat about arts integration as a form of cultural responsiveness. So, hey, James, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Ashley. I'm a bit excited too. So I'm James Dorsey. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm very excited to be here. I'm a music educator, but an artist at heart at first. Growing up, I processed most of what was going on in my life through music and dance. And that kind of carried with me, through all of grade school. And when I got to, I think it was junior year in high school, I thought I was going to be going into medicine and biology. But I had a project where we had to build a bridge out of toothpicks.
Oh.
Yeah. And they had to be like 1 inch, and they could only touch 2 other toothpicks. So while building that project, I was very frustrated, and music was my solace. And I think that was the moment I was like, yep, the messages in this music is where I'm at and where I need to be. And I need to do that for other people. So that kind of led me into studying music in undergrad, and teaching found me. My grandmother used to work at the Board of Education, and she introduced me to the resident teacher program, which allowed me to go from voice performance directly into teaching. And I've been doing it ever since.
Awesome.
So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, Ashley.
Yes, awesome. And you and I have similar paths because we both were on the performance kind of track. And then I also say teaching kind of just found me. I kind of fell into it. I knew I was gonna probably have to do it as a means of making a living until I got, the bigger gigs. But then, as fate would have it, turned out I love teaching way more than and I still love to perform. And in fact, ironically, I rarely perform now, and I miss the performance. Yeah, but very similarly. And James and I know each other. I was just thinking today, like, how long have we known each other? We met when we were doing our master's at Loyola, and I think it's been like a little over 10 years now.
Yeah, I think it's a decade. I think we should celebrate that.
We should.
Crabs. That's what we should do. Crabs.
Yes, we go to get our crabs next month. Next month, we're not going to forget. We're going to make sure that we do our little celebration of that, because I think that was 2012. I look back to see, like, well, when did I start that? So way back in 2012. It feels like a whole different world away now, right?
Yeah, and it kind of was. Like, at that time, like, education and it just was different. Like, the last 3-4 years have been like the most change I think I've seen in all of just and when I say change, like just change in attitudes, change in focus, and a willingness to kind of reflect and make changes. I think these last 4 or 5 years have been that. So it was a very different time in 2012 than it is now.
For sure. Yeah. So you already told us a little bit about yourself, but we're going to talk about arts integration, which I feel like you are like the person to go to know more about arts integration. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit about what led you to get involved with arts integration in your music program. And we should also say James is from Maryland. Just outside of the Washington, D.C. area where I'm located as well. So James, tell us a little bit about how you got involved with arts integration.
Well, coming from performance directly into teaching, I didn't have the education background of strategies and approaches to effectively do what I hope I can do better now. So I was really just relying on how music was a part of my life. And that allowed me to connect music with the world and the human experience for kids. And I found that that was the way that I connected with kids. So we found commonalities through connecting music with its context, whether it be songs about identity, music about change and wanting positive change, and even like creating music for that similar purpose. But I'll never forget, her name is Lynette Trusky. She is a Prince George's County music educator, still is, doing great things. I went to a professional development with her, and she was talking about how she had a group of students. She was talking about the Star Spangled Banner, and she really wanted to immerse them in the experience. And when you think about the Star Spangled Banner, I mean, ramparts gallantly streaming, like we don't talk like that. That's not the culture of kids
Right.
these days. So she was thinking, like, how can I get kids to really dive deep into this and really understand the emotions that are behind it? And so she designed a drama experience where the kids really thought about the text that's in the song and use drama strategies to really bring that alive in our classroom. So when I went to that professional development, I participated as a student, and I never looked at that song the same way after. And she inspired me really to think, like, how can I help students have empathy for the context that the music belongs to? And in that journey, that has led me into arts integration. I studied a post-baccalaureate certificate through the University of Maryland, and teachers like Linda Krakauer and Margaret Walker, Susan Denver, Lillian Palin, they were all people who saw arts integration as an opportunity to connect kids with kids of all ages, I should say, with their human experience, to find the things that we have in common by having music be situated in those contexts. And their thoughts about arts integration are much more than using the arts as a teaching tool. And I love arts as a teaching tool. I was Schoolhouse Rock, multiplication facts, all the way, 5, 10, 15, 20, all those songs. 3 is the magic number. Like, they're great. And I don't think they should ever, disappear. They just work. But adding on to that, the idea of connecting music with social studies, history and culture, and reading language arts, math, science, for the purpose of understanding our experience, that's where my arts integration heart really lies. And since that program, I've never not known that. Like, I can't ever introduce music to students without having it be a connected experience.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I went through a similar program at the Kennedy Center. They're changing education through the arts. So I gained my certification through that program. And I had a similar experience of, like, my mind kind of being opened up in this more expansive way of not just how we can kind of use music, kind of what you said, use music to other means, but how we can really have a connected experience through a variety of disciplines, kind of like revolving objectives, right? Like, we're hitting particular objectives in different disciplines, an art discipline, a non-arts discipline, but the goal is really to make things more connected for kids. And I would even say for myself also, because I don't see my specific approach to cultural responsiveness is very much informed by an artistic process. One, because I feel like it just makes sense. This is how I think now. Maybe it's because of that program I went through. I just think in this way of, like, I can't not see the bigger connections. I don't see music singularly. I see music as a part of a bigger construct, right? And then I also think of, when we think about cultural responsiveness, which is calling educators, regardless of the discipline, to really help kids to build those learn to learn skills and use the knowledge that they have gained. I feel like the artistic process naturally, lends itself to those things, and also allows kids to be able to transfer a creative process into other ways, right? Like an innovative process to, creating really anything, right? That artistic process in music and the arts, I feel like, is very easily transferable. And for me, I almost don't see another way to teach now, but to have a bigger connection. And so I always suggest to folks who are here in the DC area, like check out those courses. And there's lots of great things that are happening. There's even some schools that are focused, their partnerships with the Kennedy Center, because I think that when we consider like what do we want kids to get out of their K-12 or beyond, right? Big kids too. What we want them to get out of their experience is we want them to go out in the world and be able to not just have knowledge, but to have understandings that they can use out there in the world for whatever purpose that they feel is going to serve them, to be able to advance their life, to be able to have more understanding of the things that they encounter and approach, but also so that they are highly thinking kind of individuals at a bigger level. And I think sometimes when I work with teachers in their classrooms and I see like a hyper focus on like teaching a concept or teaching a technique and a skill, because I can't not think bigger connection, I immediately go to like, well, what was the purpose of us learning about, I don't know, the 16th notes, right? Is there something in that piece of music or something in that genre that we can use to connect to a bigger framework? And I always think about the influence of arts integration and the particular approach that I've developed, because I don't think that I can divorce the two. It's very much co-mingled, all up in there.
Yeah, and that makes sense, because if you think about it, like when we go throughout life, it's not like the school environment. Like the school environment, we sit in here and we're reading. It's reading literacy. And then you may or may not leave the room and you're in math, and now you're mathing. And then you may or not leave, it's science, it's social studies. But in life, I don't get up in the morning and be like, I'm mathing now. And when I go to lunch, I am PEing now, physical education now. No, life is integrated. So I see the value in learning skills within a discipline in a kind of focused way. But unless you take that skill and bring it to how it connects with personal experience, then you're not really preparing for the real world. The real world is integrated. So that's been my important lesson. And like you said, it's hard to divorce it when you see it that way, because you realize that there is that facts and skills have no purpose without being integrated. You can't, for instance, 16th notes. I can never hear 16th notes without thinking of certain kind of music that puts me in a certain place, that connects me to a certain group of people. And I would imagine that kids who experience life as it is, when they get into a classroom, they don't turn that off. Like your integrated mind does not turn off when you get in school. Sometimes our structures and systems do that. And I think that's really where a change needs to happen, because we kind of get very focused on the facts and skills, like you said, to the point where it can almost, without intention, turn off that brain that is naturally integrated. And so I think, like, when I'm introducing concepts in music, I immediately, imagery and movement always comes to mind, because how I move about the world, I visualize and I step into that space. So I can't help, as an integrated mind, not to want to go to that route. And I imagine that there's some little James Dorsey sitting in my classroom who needs that. And there's probably another kid in there who responds dramatically. So I think if I'm going to tap into their natural way of thinking, their natural way of experiencing the world, then I can't have a hyper focus just on one skill or one fact. I have to connect it to personal experience.
Right. And what you just described is cultural responsiveness, right? If you're going to tap into our students' prior knowledge and experience and interests, we have to think about how it is that they naturally move about the world, right? And I love your pointing out of, in school, we do silo the disciplines, right? Now we're in math class, now we're in science class, now we're in music class, but the world isn't like that, right? At any given moment, you're going to be called to have to integrate things, and your knowledge and your understandings of that knowledge is going to be called into from a different disciplines all at once. And so, as you were saying that, I was thinking, like, why? I wonder why that is. Is that a matter of like teacher resources? Like, just like the people needed to be able to do that? Is that a matter of like maybe not considering how the world is integrated? Because I as you were talking about that, I was thinking like, is that really how is our K-12, like the structure of even the schedule of the day, how
Mhm.
is that setting up our kids to be prepared for the real world where they're not going to have like, okay, now we're mathing, now we're working every class. Like I was thinking like, yeah, that is so, I had never really, but I knew that, right? But I never thought about in relation to preparedness for real life, how that really doesn't set anybody up for success because it doesn't mirror anything that we see anywhere else except for in school.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I feel like a creative process is really important
Mhm.
because it gives purpose to why you're learning. And because you're creating, you bring your experience to what you create, and
Mhm.
that immediately makes it culturally responsive. Like
Yeah.
you are the content, you produce the content, you are the process, you
Mhm.
become the process. So that's why I pair like the arts integration that I do really is just responding creatively to these bigger ideas.
Yeah.
And I'm encouraged by the curricula I'm seeing now
Mhm.
versus some of the um, curricula I saw towards the beginning of my career,
Mhm.
because big ideas are starting to be embedded in the curriculum.
Yeah.
I think they've always been there, but the resources and activities didn't teach um, very well to those big ideas. So, like to give an example, like kindergarten is all about who am I? How am I part of a community? And I feel like the younger grades, for some reason, just do it well.
Yeah.
Like their curricula is always focused on how it connects to real life, even as they're learning letters and learning
Yeah.
numbers and how to track where you are. Those are very specific, and there are very specific techniques to teach those. But at the same time, the purpose is built in.
Yeah.
But as you get to older grades, it's very because the skills are so much more advanced. I think
Mhm.
that's part of the reason why it's kind of siloed, is because the amount of strategies that are needed to meet those needs
Yeah.
in a I mean, I think our school days, especially the elementary, is very short. So, with a given short amount of time for a teacher to teach all these skills in a scaffolded way, it's very easy for a big idea to get lost. And
Yeah.
unless a curriculum is set up such that at every step of that scaffolding, a big idea can be addressed,
Mhm.
it often gets lost.
Yeah.
But the advantage of a creative process is if I am responding to a big idea, like fairness and equality and equity, in math, I have a purpose for why I'm studying percentages and how they relate to what people experience in life. There's
Mhm.
a purpose to learning it because I want to understand why is 50% for that person fair, but 50% for this person, not fair.
Right.
Equal does not mean fair, and that's a big idea. So
Yeah.
if I'm creating music or visual arts to represent those percentages, then I'm giving purpose to why I need to understand
Yeah.
the skills behind them.
Yeah, for sure. And I love your pointing out of, because I would say even throughout my time in the classroom and even now, I have seen definitely a shift towards more of like a conceptual focus in how curriculum is created. But I will also say I don't know in music education that I'm seeing like a huge shift along with this. I feel like my own study, my own experience with conceptual ideas, big ideas, is in like non-music exclusive situations, like when I'm doing curriculum and things that are not necessarily focused in music education. That's more often where I see like we're focusing on a bigger concept here. We're looking at how patterns and things change over time. And I feel like in music education, in some places, I think we're starting to see a little bit of that. But I would say in some of these like bigger curriculums that get put out to folks, we're still seeing a huge emphasis on activity to activity to activity. And I know we've talked about this, maybe we just talked about this last weekend, but I think one of the things that overwhelms music teachers, and everybody's exhausted. Like this has been an unprecedented time for just living in the world, being a human being, and let alone, education, And I think further why in music education specifically, since that's who I support, I think one of the things that we do against ourselves and cause us to be in this like frantic hamster wheel kind of feeling is that going activity to activity to activity. Whereas if we focused more on conceptual understandings, bigger ideas, and letting those unfurl over a unit or a semester or even a whole year, right? When I was teaching online, I kind of had like one focus for the year. I
Yeah.
didn't see my students, often enough for it to make sense to do another way. And I really see this kind of resistance to think in bigger, more conceptual ideas as something that keeps a lot of music teachers frustrated. And I think part of it is just because we aren't trained in this more integrated approach, which is a shame because like I said, I can't unknow and unsee the connections. I literally go through the world constantly seeing connections to music. Oh, this could have been a great unit. Like even now that I'm not in the classroom, I'm constantly like, man, that would have been an excellent.
Yeah.
I would have been all over that if I was in the classroom right now. And so I would love to hear you talk a little bit like how do you define arts integration like as a whole? And then if there's like a musical component to that, how would you kind of see like the music part of arts integration?
Yeah, that's some great points about yeah. With arts integration, you cannot unsee connections.
Yeah.
I define arts integration as it's hard for me to define it um, because it's robust.
Yeah.
It can include many different things. I feel like it's when you respond using the arts. Like that's my personal definition.
Mm-hmm.
And there are ways of doing that that are more like teaching tools and more like supports for another discipline. There
Yeah.
are ways of doing it where the response is um, really to aid the music. So sometimes, you bring in the song of the Star Spangled Banner because it helps you sing it with more expression when you know that context.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's times when it just feels very equal as far as like the disciplines that are being connected. And for me, I found that these bigger concepts, these bigger ideas that are connected to human experience make the equality of disciplines that show up in that unit um, a lot easier. It's a lot easier because the idea is transcending the disciplines that are connected. So
Mm-hmm.
we're always constantly engaging with that big idea, whether it's part of being inspired to create,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's the process of drafting and thinking about the music discipline, maybe the non-arts or even arts discipline and how they can come together really to express that idea. Um, and really elevating with the intent of making those messages clear. I
Mm-hmm.
find that when I go about that process, there is never a moment where human experience and the humanity is not there.
Mm-hmm.
And so specifically music integration, that's what I look for. I
Yeah.
look for opportunities to create or respond musically to help us better know ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and know the world around us. To give you an example, I have um, a project I do in the beginning of the year, and it's a unit where we look at how music expresses different values. And we talk about how those values are experienced in daily life, how they're represented in the media, values like mindfulness, perseverance, friendship, and reciprocity.
Mm-hmm.
And then the culminating activity is for us to pick one of those values, and each student gets to make music that represents one of their values, which allows them to bring their personal experience and preferences into that music. But we also write one together. And the kind of dialogue that happens in an art space where a big idea is what's anchoring the learning,
Mm-hmm.
it's very open, it's very inclusive, and everyone has an entry point into the discussion
Yeah.
because the discussion is built upon human experiences and supported by the disciplines, including music. So I see students come alive in ways that just studying musical concepts would never bring about. You know,
Mm-hmm.
like I love 16th notes. I love learning the major scale. They're
Yeah.
all great. They sound great. Love learning chords on the ukulele. But man, when we're playing the uh, ukulele, sorry, to express leaning upon each other while we're playing Lean on Me, and to
Mm-hmm.
see kids taking turns with ukulele, really watching each other and supporting each other. It's
Mm-hmm.
like not only is the product representing the value, but the way they're working with each other is also an expression of that value. And so the kind of arts integration where you're thinking about big ideas means not only does the product express your learning about that big idea and the connected disciplines,
Mm-hmm.
but also the way you interact with each other and the content can also be an expression of that. And
Yeah.
that's, I'll be honest, that's my favorite kind of music integration.
Yeah. Awesome. I love that. I love especially what you said about it makes a way for there to be multiple entry points for students to be able to have access. I think especially as I continue to deepen my work in supporting more equitable access for all of our students, and I see cultural responsiveness especially as being a really key lever that we can pull in order to do that. I see a lot of just like natural alignment between arts integration, as you just described it so beautifully, of not just the concepts that we're learning through music, but like literally how can we express those things to the bigger ideas that are anchoring us through that, and also making sure that we're still being culturally responsive for our students. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how is I rather arts integration and cultural responsiveness. How are those two ideas for you complementary or not? Feel free to not, but I feel like you're probably going to say yes, they are, because I know you. But I
Spoiler
would hear
alert.
your thoughts as far as like how do you see the alignment of those two approaches, especially in regards to music education in our schools.
So, um, just thinking in music, our national core art standards are integrated. There,
Yeah.
if you look at those standards really carefully, consideration of context and purpose,
Mm-hmm.
experiences, it's all embedded in the language of those standards. So if we're really moving music education forward, we should
Mm-hmm.
really be looking back to those standards. They're
Yeah.
outstanding. We are always connecting when we create, perform, and respond. Um, so within music, there's already the setup for us to bring in our sense of cultures,
Yeah.
race, identity, kid culture, gaming
Yeah.
culture. There are so many cultures that exist within a classroom, and
Mm-hmm.
the standards can actually bring that out.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking, for instance, when I'm having students select music for for us to analyze. Even in that selection, we're thinking about which music represents our experience,
Yeah.
which music aligns with our preferences, which music um, aligns with our experiences and where we need to grow.
Mm-hmm.
But when you start talking about context and purpose, you're immediately integrating other subjects
Yeah.
because context and purposes belong in the integration of what we do. So
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of a context without thinking of the people who are involved. And the
Mm-hmm.
minute you start having a discussion about context, you start realizing um, that key component of just being culturally relevant, that you need to have some kind of cultural competence. You need to know who you are, how people can add to that experience, how you can add to their experience, and how we can collectively grow an experience from that. That
Yeah.
kind of cultural competency um, comes with understanding context and purposes. So
Mm-hmm.
I really see the alignment happening by those standards. They're calling us, they're calling music educators to make sure that ideas beyond music are in every step of the process, from when we select music all the way to we're sharing and reflecting on our products and processes.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that fact that when we create, perform, when we respond, they're unique to us. I see, we have our create standards. We know that they are creating, but I
Yeah.
see performing as a creation. You're creating your own unique interpretation of that existing work. So
Mhm.
our response to that work is going to reflect our culture.
Mhm.
And if we consider the context of that music and how
Mhm.
we connect to it. If we don't do that, then we're not doing that music justice. We're
Yeah.
not meeting the expressive intent of the composer or ourselves as a composer. We're disconnected. So
Mhm.
I really see um, creating, whether that be original work or unique interpretation, or even the expression of music in another art form, as cultural responsiveness, because it is truly based on who we are at that moment.
Mhm. Yeah, and I feel like the idea of creating, composing, just interpreting can be really intimidating for a lot of music educators, but I don't think that it needs to be. And I think what you just said, like in your performance, that is in fact a creation, right? Because you are interpreting it the way that you're deciding to interpret. And I 100% agree. And I think because maybe we as music educators in our own training to become music educators, there's a lot of focus on the performant parts, right? And we forget that there's three whole other strands, right? There's still connecting and responding and creating. And I think creating especially can be very intimidating for folks. But actually, I think that creating gives us so many opportunities to make sure that a variety of our learners that are in our classroom have a way to express themselves. And I think that's the power of the arts, right? The power of the arts to be a way for you to be able to express your unique experience, your unique perspective on whatever the thing might be. And so I hear that quite often from music teachers of like just a shying away kind of the creating part, just because that's what, everybody's frame of reference is going to direct you to choose things or not choose things, right? So if your frame of reference is more comfortable in performing, then that's what you're going to do. And as you just so beautifully said, I think there's so much opportunity in creating. And when I think of like the creative process, the artistic process that we bring our students through, we're thinking more of like a arts integrated, for me, an arts integrated kind of culturally responsive, equitable, kind of all intermingled approach. I always see our culmination of creating somehow. It might be that we create something entirely brand new. It might be something that we put our spin on. It might just be the way that we interpret. But I think exactly what you just said, that when we make sure that we are including that creation, that's where we're really able to allow kids to most be responding to their own perspective and their unique experience.
Yeah, and I hear you when you're mentioning about the apprehension about creating,
Yeah.
um, because it really puts you in a space where if you're not careful, you can see things as mistakes. And
Mm,
I have started to try my best to eliminate that word from
mm,
my vocabulary,
yeah.
because you do the best you can with what you have to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead of thinking of creativity as a blank canvas, I think of it more as making choices.
Hmm.
And when I can make a simple choice, that can move me forward. If I find what I would call a mistake, I no longer call it a mistake. I consider it a choice. I made that choice. I get information about what that choice brought, and
Mm-hmm.
then I reflect on it and I move forward.
Yeah.
And so when I'm thinking, how did I get to a point where creating is something we do all, like in my learning space, all the time? It came from starting small with limited choices. So
Mm-hmm.
in kindergarten, take that song that already has a melody and create new words to it. Simple choices.
Yeah.
Or in fifth grade, when you have a chord progression and you're looking to create a melody, start with which solfege belongs to those chords.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's the intimidation comes from that blank canvas. And when
Mm-hmm.
you see a blank canvas, you think of all the mistakes you can make.
Ooh.
Instead, I say, think of it as more of like crocheting or something. You know, you are building the experience, and you can always get to the end of a strand and realize that you want to go in this direction and you want to try that stitch.
Mhm.
But the idea is that it's always moving forward, it's always building, versus I got to fill this up. Like, which choice am I
Yeah.
going to make? I've got too many. So, I hear it. I hear it. And when I talk to music educators, just my colleagues, and even outside of music, um,
Mhm.
with arts integration in general, just how do we get people to create? I think what helped me was just starting small with a limited amount of choices.
Mhm.
And from there, you get information. And I think part of the creative process that has educators being kind of apprehensive is, will I know what to do after we made the choices?
Yeah.
Will I know where to go next? And that's where cultural responsiveness comes in,
Mhm.
because where you go next, that information comes from the people who are creating.
Yeah.
So if you listen, you'll know where to go next.
Yeah.
So going back to the example of the kids making a song with me to represent one of those values in the class,
Mhm.
we start out with what are we going to do first?
Mhm.
And it's decision time. So sometimes it's just making that choice. And
Mhm.
I look at the class and I'm like, where do we start? And a kid calls out, let's do the beat first. And I'm like, okay, you mean rhythms? Okay, let's make some rhythms.
Yeah.
So I have them, improvise some rhythms, and I use an app called Drumbit that's free and don't have to log in. It's online, internet based, and I input their improvisations. And
Mhm.
before you know it, we have a loop that I see the kids, kind of bop into. And I'm
Mhm.
like, okay, that gives me information. This is a rhythmic class. Like that's where they go.
Yeah.
So am I going to go right to melody then? No, because I know that rhythm is something that they're really responding to.
Mhm.
So it seems to me like lyrics in a rhythmic way might be the
Mhm.
next place to go,
Yeah.
instead of attaching melody to that right away. That
Mhm.
is very different than how I started when I was thinking about how to help kids create. I
Mhm.
started from, we write the rhythm, then we
Mhm.
write the melody on top, then you
Yeah.
add some words, sprinkle on some words, make sure the notation's right, and then you're good. And at the
Mhm.
end of that process, what happens? They have a whole lot of great, pretty notation, and they can't sing a word of it.
Yep. Nope, not one.
Not
Not one.
they were disconnected from the music they were making. They didn't get a say in their process, let
Mhm.
alone what that product was really going to look like.
Mhm.
So, what really took me back a step was to say, trust myself to say that if I pay attention, I will know what to do next.
Yeah.
And I wish somebody had told me that. But they kind of did. Because, like you said, sometimes your professional development comes outside of music education. And for
Yeah.
me, that's very similar. Um,
Mhm.
I have read so much about mindfulness, being in the moment.
Mhm.
I've been in therapy, and that's something we've really focused on.
Yeah.
Um, and because of that, I am very aware and very observant when I'm intentional about it,
Mhm.
So, um, I if I had to say what would really help someone start creating, I guess my one tip of many would be just be in the moment. Be
Yeah.
with them, discover the culture that's already in the room, and you'll know
Mm.
what to do next.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also what you're hitting on is, in fact, where I start the teachers that I work with is we have to first be able to be self-aware enough to know that kind of naturally, I feel like people who are attracted to being teachers are a little bit control freaky, and we want to hold on very tightly to control over the process, and creating and really being because what you just described was an authentic process of creating. Because I don't know that in real life people that are creating do this kind of like contrived, like first I wrote the rhythm and then I added like I don't think that's ever a way that people out in the real world ever create. It's a very contrived, school-based kind of I don't even want to say task, almost like an exercise. I feel like an exercise and not really like an authentic way. And so I think what you hit on so lovely was the fact that as educators, really the first shift that we need to make as we move towards a more equitable, culturally responsive, integrated approach is to make sure that we are not the bottleneck in the way, because often we are kind of the barrier, which is like the hardest thing to accept. And I get it. Like I remember the moment when I had to be like, you know what, Ashley, you got to be real here. You're causing the problem here. Like you are the reason why things are
Myself
going awry.
included.
Yeah, because you set the tone. And often what I learned, I think at first when people would say to me things like, the way you lead is how the kids will follow. I think at first I was kind of like, no, they're kind of doing what they want to do. But what I really was more mindful about, even just my posture, my tone of voice, the pace I was taking when I was talking to the students, the kind of taking a moment to kind of digest what they were saying before I responded. Actually, yeah, we do really set the tone. We have so much more control, I think, than we realize. And it's just that we have to be very mindful of how we're wielding that control. Are we wielding it in a way that's going to foster belonging with our students and a co-partnership, as you described? You know, if you listen, you'll know where to go, which is a more a culturally responsive way to develop a learning environment, which is what I advocate for. Is are you creating a learning environment where kids feel like they belong, they feel like the space is theirs, or are they just like welcomed into it, right? And that's different when you're letting them lead the creative process versus you're giving them this kind of contrived school-based number one, do this, number two, that's not really like authentic to how people do anything, out in the real world. And isn't that that process of having to make a choice? Are we going to start here or there? Isn't that your whole life? Like I feel like every day that's my life. It's like I wake up and I decide, am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? Right? Like there's always a choice, and there's ways, even in our music classrooms, that we can help our kids develop healthy skills to make good choices, even when we're creating music.
Yeah, I agree. And the part about self-awareness, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
Because if I were really thinking about creation, do I create music by writing down the rhythm and then put no? Uh, Something from the world inspires me.
Yeah.
And usually it's connected to human experience and therefore is a big idea. So when
Mhm.
I'm thinking of arts integration, even just in the creation of music, I'm integrated because if I'm really aware of my surroundings, something is going to inspire me to make a choice.
Yeah.
So I do feel like self-awareness is really important from the teacher mindset to build that space where people feel like they can go where they feel led. And I think that's also true in explicitly teaching self-awareness
Mhm.
to people of all ages.
Yeah.
I'm very excited to see that social emotional learning is becoming a focus because wow, like when you know yourself and
Mhm.
you know how to relate to other people, then when you get information about people, you know how to respond.
Mhm.
You know your choices. You may not always make the choice that has the better of the outcomes, but
Yeah.
even then, when you get to that situation, you make that choice and it doesn't work, then you know how to look at the information both within yourself and the people around you to make a better choice.
Yeah.
And so that's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, that's really important in making decisions that are really connected and responsive and authentic. Uh,
Mhm.
and so I'm happy to see social emotional learning become a focus in education in general,
Yeah.
but specifically in the music education um, learning space, I think that needs to be explicitly taught.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's my mindset and my willingness to share my process, that vulnerability
Mhm.
that inspires young people to do the same.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, Alicia Lee, who worked with the Maryland State Department of Education, I credit her for inspiring me with that idea that
Mhm.
are you willing to be vulnerable about your process?
Yeah.
So when I'm thinking about how to make the space feel like everyone can create, sometimes I have to narrate my inner thinking.
Yeah.
I don't know where to go next.
Yeah.
I heard this. And when we got stuck, well, a couple of my classes this past fall, we got stuck at a place where it was like, it's just not moving forward.
Mhm.
Who was stuck? Me. I'm the one that's making it stuck
Yeah.
because I'm trying to move in this direction instead of paying attention to what I'm thinking and what they are thinking.
Yeah.
And when I took a moment and was like, just took a deep breath, really, took a break from it. We took a break from it. And I came back another class period. And I was like, look, let's sit in a circle so we can all see each other. So we
Yeah.
went from our rows to sitting in a circle. We could see everybody's faces. And I was like, here's the idea. Somebody say something. And so the kid just, said a word or two. And I was like, oh, that's good.
Mhm.
There. Another kid adds on. And then I was like, oh, in my brain, when I hear this is what it makes me think of. And this is what it makes me think of. And therefore, I could go in this direction or that direction. And just by sharing that inner thinking, other kids would be like, yeah, that also makes me think of this kind of music. So maybe we need that beat.
Yeah.
Or this makes me think of like dancing. So I think our tempo needs to be a little bit quicker. It
Mhm.
was like my vulnerability and sharing just my inner thoughts and really my full awareness that sometimes I don't know where to go next.
Yeah.
I have to consider the options within my brain. And even as the adult musician in the room with young people, even
Mhm.
I have to consider the options and take the risk that the option that I choose may not be the best one.
Yeah.
Be okay with that, to reflect on it and move about differently.
Mhm.
Kids of all ages need artists who are willing to be vulnerable and share how they're moving about,
Mhm.
because sometimes seeing it in someone else validates what you are feeling but unwilling to share.
Yeah. Yeah, and I actually think that we all would do better if we embrace that idea of vulnerability. And we remember that if we want our students to take the risks that are necessary to really learn, right? Because learning is messy. And
Yep.
the only way that you can really figure out if something's going to work or if it's not going to work is you have to try it. And that means that things are not always going to work out right. But I love what you said earlier about like getting rid of the word mistake, right? It's just about a choice that we made. I made this choice or this one, and I saw what happened when I made this choice, and perhaps now I want to make a different choice. It's not about the mistake or the fix. I think so many adults and kids struggle with this idea of like we have to be perfect, we have to get it right. I think that also probably leads to music teachers resistance to creating, because in order to create you do have to make those choices and you do have to have things maybe not go the way you wanted them to be able to figure out what you do want it to look like. And so I think we all would do better to remember that that first step is really us needing to be willing to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
so that our students can then see that, because we need to model for them, right?
Mhm.
They'll be able to see us doing it first, and then they'll be able to do it. And I think that also that starts to kind of bring them closer to us and also us to them, because of that. In that vulnerability, I think is the ability to cultivate a belongingness that can't happen any other way. You really do need to see people be their full and authentic self, and to really to see somebody's full and authentic, their whole self. You got to see the not as beautifully manicured makeup, kind of cover parts. You got to see the things that are a little dirty and a little out of order and a little bit crooked, right?
Mhm.
Something that you said earlier that I want to go back to is, I love that you, and I forget how you said it. I wrote down standards, but I remember kind of what you said. Because I think that for somebody who could be listening into this conversation or thinking about this idea of a more culturally responsive, integrated with the arts and approach that leads to equity is what I believe. They might be thinking that this is kind of like a woo woo. We're just kind of thinking of different things off the top of our mind. So I love that you specifically pointed out that our, especially the national art standards, I think really do lay out a process very well for us. And I think that for some music educators, the intimidation with the idea of using this kind of approach might be, well, how is it still aligned to standards? And then two, some of the standards are really do require a lot of unpacking. And so for someone that maybe is not as skillful yet of knowing how to unpack a standard, I totally see how some of them, I did a workshop last night where we were going through some different standards and thinking what's like the real connection of like why somebody would do this. And as I was reading them out, one of them in particular, I was like, "Ooh, that was a mouthful." That I just let me give you a moment to process that. First, to unpack it before we even talk about what the connections are. And so I totally see when teachers are like, "Yeah, but it's kind of hard to see. Like, what is the standard even asking?" What would you say to a teacher who is hearing us talk about this beautifully arts related, arts integrated, more mindful, and even like a slower pace of teaching? I feel like, right, it's not a matter of like trying to whip through a lot of content. It's really about getting deep. What would you say to a teacher who is maybe saying, okay, yeah, that's great, but I have a pacing guide I have to follow, or I have to cover all of these standards, or I only see my students, 30 minutes a week. Like, what would your response be to somebody who is thinking this is great and wonderful, and also wondering like how is this accomplished amidst all of the other curricular demands?
I have found that the process moves quickest when it's the most authentic. And
Mm,
sometimes as an educators, we put on this educator brain and
mhm.
forget that we're artists.
Yeah.
And when I, especially unpacking the standards, when I relate it to how I create, how I've seen others create, and their process, then it makes it a little bit easier for me to unpack the standards. So like there are some that's like, oh yeah, they're wordy. They're
Yeah.
wordy, but they're wordy because they're things we actually do. So like
Hmm.
when I'm analyzing music, I am looking for how the parts fit together. I'm looking at can I move to it? Can I um, perform it? Can I improvise with it? Can I see how it fits together with the bigger picture? How is the bigger picture? Like we do this when
Hmm.
we are given a piece of music in an ensemble and we have to, play or sing it. Like we
Yeah.
need to know how our part fits with everyone else. We need to know when we have the melody. These are things we do. And the standards were built upon those natural processes.
Hmm.
So I think um, um, we kind of lose sight of that.
Hmm.
And that's when we get that teacher burnout where we're just going activity to activity, activity, because
Right.
we're not doing the thing that naturally comes out of that one activity. Like I
Right.
can't do a folk dance in my classroom without knowing the form, knowing the beats, like um,
Hmm.
understanding my part versus someone else's, personal space. Like all of those things are embedded because I know what a folk dance is like. I've seen people do it. I did the electric slide both with my feet and on roller skates back in the day.
Oh.
Yep, yep. That was summer camp. And I didn't pick apart all those things and then move on to something else. Like, oh, I can do the right move. Okay, I'm done. No, you got to be able to do the right move and turn. You need to make sure you don't bump people. Like that's authentic. So
Right.
if you, I think sometimes the hesitation and the overwhelming comes because our professional development sometimes is very teachery,
Yeah.
forgetting the artistry. So if you can connect back to what do we naturally do as artists, I feel like some of that pacing speeds up
Hmm.
because you can't do certain things without doing everything that's involved in a very quick and authentic way. I think the second part of it is sometimes you just need to see it in action. So
Mm.
being able to go and experience quality art and to know kind of the behind the scenes process that was used to create that art
Yeah.
can really reveal how people just naturally do things that you
Mhm.
can bring that into your classroom. So I think of like when I'm teaching students how to, you know, interpret music by creating a dance.
Mm.
Well, I was a dancer for many years, and I still respond through dancing. And often that process shows up in my room.
Mhm.
So when I'm given a blank canvas and the kids have to create, I'm not thinking of um, just teaching the beat and just teaching um, the form. Like I'm
Mhm.
thinking of all the integrated things that come with it because I know that's what I do when I dance.
Yeah.
So if you can see that in action And you can, I mean, YouTube is great. YouTube is great. You can hear an artist talk about their whole process.
Yeah.
It's free 99 to go on YouTube and just look at somebody's process. I love watching the behind the scenes of movies
Yeah.
and artists making music, like, and it inspires me um to think, well, if they're doing that in real life, like, how can I just bring that into my room? And
Mhm.
that's really like when I gave the example of creating the song, that's really where it came from, because I'm thinking about me in the room creating music. Like, I don't do it like that. So why am I going to do like an educator teacher way
Right.
classroom? Really, education should follow natural life.
Yeah.
Education should be inspired by the things we naturally do in real
Mhm.
life.
Yeah.
It's going to be scaffolded because that's what we need to learn. But the
Right.
scaffolding does not mean we take away the humanity of it.
Yeah.
The way education sometimes uses the frameworks and the strategies as the starting point, instead of thinking like the starting point is out there. Let's
Right.
see out there first.
Mhm.
And I get it, like being, and I still experience it, like pacing and 30-minute lesson, and sometimes transitions, sometimes no transitions. Like there's a lot going on, but
Yeah.
oh, it goes so much faster when I just do it authentically.
Right. And I would even argue for teachers that are wondering, like, how do we present a way of learning where it's not activity to activity to activity, and instead allows us to really sit with the learning and let it unfurl. I would even argue that when we center the why, like, why would somebody in the real world, a musician or not, why would somebody actually do this, connects to, on a much deeper level with our students than, okay, boys and girls, today we're going to learn about the ostinato, right? Like, what is the actual reason, like, where we see ostinati, right? And kids already are familiar with that. They usually call it
Oh,
beats, right? So we can connect it to something that they already know, or a word that they are using that's more natural for them, right? But I find that when, instead of us focusing so hyperly on these concepts and these little individual things, but instead we focus on the bigger question of why would anybody even do this? Where out in the world do we see it? I find that because kids are able to hook in better
mhm.
and they're able to really understand what it means, like the concepts that we're now bringing along with it, I find that we were able to cover a lot more. I should say cover. We're able to investigate a lot more things
Yes,
in the
investigate.
lessons because now they're really connected and they understand it. Because surface knowledge is very fleeting. Like in one lesson, if all I did was move some information into your short-term memory, it's going to be gone when I see you in a week. But if you really understand this thing that I taught you on Monday, and you see the bigger connection to it, and maybe I even gave you some points of inspiration to go out in your, in your car going to the, I don't know, going to church, and you're listening to something, and you are able to kind of catch little pieces of what we learned in class and connect them to something you actually saw. When I see you in a week, now you're going to really remember that concept that we learned, and now we can go to the next thing, versus I have to restart the whole process of teaching you the thing again because it was only in your short-term memory, it didn't last anywhere, and now I have to both teach the thing that we did last week and try and cram this new thing. It's like, actually, if we slow down and really focus on understanding and not just surface knowledge, our kids retain better and thus learn better over time. And then I find that some of this argument of, well, I only see them once a week or once every 6-day rotation, or, we have a concert coming up and we only have 3 rehearsals. Like, I find that some of that argument becomes irrelevant when we focus on actual understanding and
Mhm.
not just that surface knowledge. I think that that causes uh, a different way that we have to teach, right? Instead of having like 18 objectives in your lesson, and no, no, you're not really teaching 18. You have like one, and making sure that you assess it really well, and allow time for kids to really chew on it and practice it and have a different way that they're coming through it in a 30-minute lesson. Now we're really cooking, I feel like. And I found that when I really focused on, like, this is the big idea, and how can in each lesson we just come at it from a different angle as we continue through this process of creating, and as artists, how can we step into really an artistry approach? I found that it was less stressful for my planning, also my planning and design, because it wasn't a matter of like all these different individual things. Everything was connected back to the big idea. It was so much easier to to plan. And it allowed me to really, almost like giving myself permission to slow down.
Yeah.
To slow down, because I see, you know what, we are going to hit way more than the standards I originally thought for this unit. We're actually going to hit way more because I see in every lesson how we're able to build and build and build more and more significant connections, right? And so when I work with teachers, that's what I'm always pushing against is we've got to get out of this activity, and instead a bigger idea, a conceptual understanding, and how can we, and sometimes those big ideas and conceptual understandings are not music specific. In fact, the best ones are not, I think, music specific. Best ones, we could also like walk over to the art teacher and we could do something there. We could go to your homeroom classroom. We can talk about that in math, right? Those are the best ones because the more connections, the deeper the understanding, right? And then when I see you next time, we're going to be able to build on that instead of having to constantly put more foundation in place.
Yeah, and that's the design of big ideas. They're meant to be investigated and explored in multiple ways.
Mm-hmm.
I have used units as my anchor, I think, since I can remember. And that happened because first it was a teacher who inspired me. Her name is Kathy Wesley. I worked with her for years. And she was someone who really introduced me to how to prioritize a lot of different activities by doing units.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I combined that with my knowledge of arts integration and connecting to human experience, I found, like you said, that we had more ways of accessing learning. Like we could investigate so many different ways because I'm not tied to each activity. I think sometimes in education, we forget that activities are a means to an end. What is the end? What is the end? What is the why? Because if you lose sight of that, then you're doing a disservice to music, because music is meant to be, in my opinion, it is a response to what happens around us. But also doing a disservice to the learning, because like you said, it's surface level if it's not integrated with purpose and the why. So I love that units are something that are important to you. I always love finding other music educators who see the value in it, because we can speak a language that is more than just what strategies and what activities are using. It sets a purpose when I go to professional development, because I'm looking beyond strategies and activities. I still need those. I still need it. They don't go away.
Right.
But I'm very selective, because now I'm thinking like, which and why and how deep can I go with that few number versus how many can I add to my I wouldn't even call it lesson plan, almost to-do list to teach this concept. Like I don't need a to-do list. I need depth, and depth comes from knowing why and being very selective. So units help me do that.
Yeah. And as you are talking, I feel, well, in general, whenever I talk to you about education things, I feel like you just exude an artistry and an idea of, instead of us being dictated to by the activities, right? But instead, how can we be inspired by the world around us, by music that we encountered? You know, I'm often asked by teachers, like when I share different, units and things that I do, like, well, where did you get that? Or like, how did you come to it? And I don't always have an answer, because quite honestly, I just get inspired by things that I encounter. Sometimes literally when I understand the context of a piece of music, or I understand like the artist's intent for creating, sometimes that gives me inspiration to create a unit for my students, or did. And now I have all these like units that who knows, well, I'll share those with teachers so they can do it for me. But I feel like something that I love about your approach is that you exude this idea of artistry rather than just I'm a teacher, right? So as an artist, how can I help to inspire this learning within my students that's not just getting them from point A to B to C to D, but is really helping them to craft their own path through that. I really think I respect that a lot about your approach a lot. And I think it's so needed in education as we think about how do we prepare our kids for this this new world, right? The world that's becoming, we're already a global society, but it's becoming rapidly more necessary that kids are going out into the workplace, not just ready to be, factory workers, but to really be creative, innovative folks, right? We live in a world where that's really what we need for people to be able to do. It's not going to be good enough that you can just be, told what to do and figure it out. Like, you have to be able to like create and innovate. And I love that the approach, when we think about an integrated way, sets our students already up so beautifully for that. So
Mm-hmm.
when we're thinking about how do we best, set up our kids, and in this space, we're thinking about music education. How can we reimagine it to be more equitable so that all of our students not just have access? I think, sometimes I think the word access gets thrown around, but access without action is not really the same thing, right? So not just that they have access, but they actually have a path that we have paid for them to be able to engage however they want to in our music classrooms, outside of our music classrooms, but in our field, right? I'm curious, what are your thoughts around how can we use this more integrated approach to ensure that there is equitable access for all of the kinds of learners, not just the ones who come to us already excited, but
Yeah.
those kids who are like, why do we even do music in the first place? Why is this even a class? Like, how can we make sure that there's a place still for those students? Because they still like music, because everybody does.
Yeah. Yeah.
An experience, right? But they don't see, because we haven't made it explicit, they don't see why it's purposeful, and thus those kids never have an equitable path, right? So I'm curious, what are your thoughts on how arts integration as a part of our cultural responsive, equitable approach can be a way to provide for that equity for all kinds of learners, whatever they're coming to us with?
Sometimes I think educators wait for the next curriculum rewrite or the next directive
Mm-hmm.
um, as the inspiration for change,
Mm-hmm.
and that often leads down a path of, again, like more strategies, more activities. But I think um, arts integration and cultural responsiveness begins with the teacher's reflection.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I believe that when you are connected to yourself as a person, as a human being, then you can start recognizing the humanity in other people. I
Mm.
think education is just one big experiment in empathy. If you don't have empathy, you can't move forward in our world.
Yeah.
I think about what you said about the workforce that we need.
Yeah.
I'm not going to a doctor who knows all the facts, but doesn't know how to talk to me and how
Yeah.
to help me, and not just medically, but like emotionally, and to get through that, because there's is it the word psychosomatic? Like, everything about our body is connected to how we feel and
Yeah.
what we experience. So why would I want a doctor who's disconnected from that?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to prepare those people to, treat me when I get old, we need to be doing some reflection ourselves as educators and
Mm-hmm.
make sure that have the mindset, and are modeling that mindset, so that becomes the culture of the learning space.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is the culture we hope for outside of that learning space.
Yeah.
I think a more empathetic society is a better society.
I
when
agree.
and that work is never done because people are always changing.
Yeah.
And one way for arts integration and cultural responsiveness to come together is to be aware. And when you
Mm-hmm.
are aware of connections and aware of people, both yourself and others, then you can start making informed decisions about where to go next, how
Mm-hmm.
to connect, and how to make sure everyone is cared for. I mean, if that's the doctor that I want in the future, then I can't be the music doctor who knows all the music facts, knows how to teach it, has an exercise for everything, but
Mm-hmm.
does not know how to help invite someone in via humanity. If I
Yeah.
can't do that as a music educator, how am I going to expect that to be our next generation? I can't. So
Right.
I truly believe arts integration starts with being a human and recognizing your humanity.
Yeah.
And when you can do that, then you're set up to be more empathetic. And when you're more empathetic, you can find more connections and be more inclusive.
Yeah. Yeah, 150% agree. I really think that often we as educators, and then specifically as music educators, we're constantly searching for how can we be more diverse, and how can I throw another diverse song in here, or I've got more diverse. I say diverse with quotation marks if you can't see me, because one person and one song inherently cannot be diverse, because diversity is difference. So there has to be more than one, right? So like, how are we really, what are we really talking about when we're thinking about one person or one piece of music? But I feel like this is kind of the moment that we're in, is because there's not a lot of examples of how do we really create an equitable, inclusive, diverse, rich, culturally robust kind of space in our music programs. There's not a whole lot of examples. And so as music educators look around and try to figure it out, it looks like maybe I choose, a piece of music composed by a black or brown composer, or maybe I choose a song in Chinese because I have Chinese students, which of course is so problematic on so many levels when you're essentializing a person to like one very small part of their identity. And I think as we continue to think about like what is the pathway forward to an equitable music education, as you just so beautifully said, of course, was we have to just be human, right? We have to think about that empathy piece. And I think when we are considering the human touch and that empathy piece, that leads us as music educators to consider all of the other experiences and ways of understanding that aren't just our own, right? Because we get caught up so much in our, that's part of being a human being, is that we are inherently kind of self-centered beings because we only can operate from our own experience. But in being able to have a more empathetic and compassionate approach, you have to be able to expand that frame of reference to include other people, right? And so as I continue to think for myself and for the teachers that I work with and support, how do I continue to help push thinking forward in this way? I think the way that we do it is we have to remember that the curriculum rewrite and the repertoire is fun and great, but it doesn't really matter how beautiful your curriculum is or your units are, or how diverse your set of concert pieces are, if you yourself have not begun this self-work of really being able to embrace empathy and compassion and just humanity for others. It really begins there. And I know it's not as like flashy and sexy as like all the things that we see, but really how we get there, I think everything goes back to you as the individual and that path that you're on, right? Are you going to be able to really walk that path and go forward, or are you going to continue to stay kind of stuck in the same place where you are? And I think as we see around us, music programs all over our country are really struggling, both programs where it's mandatory for kids to be in, because the problem when it's mandatory right now, the problems we're seeing is there's a lot of behavior concerns, and behavior is just communication. The kids are communicating, they don't want to be there. That's the unfortunate like reality that I think is hard for folks to hear, is that the way we're teaching, they don't want to be there. And for programs where it's not mandatory, the kids are literally not there. And so as we consider to think, how do we reimagine this more equitable approach to our field of music education, which is so beautiful and has so much potential to be so powerful, we have to start with that humanity piece, empathy, and not, poor baby pity, but really how can I as an individual work on myself so that I can have space for the humans that are in our rooms, for sure.
Absolutely. 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 Like I need to put that on a t-shirt, like humanity. Like sometimes we forget the humanity, and there are so many structures and systems that are set up, like we said, talked earlier, like it's just set up not to honor that. And it's that personal reflection that's going to change that. There are no curricula, like you said, that's going to do anything without people. We need to be people. We're people. We're people.
Yeah. We are, and we can't forget that, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously. Yes, I love it. Well, we could continue to talk. Like we could obviously just sit here and chat, and we will. But maybe we should wrap it up for today. And so before we go, I wanted to give you a chance, James, to share. You have a couple of really exciting things coming up, and so I wanted to give you some space to share with the people about those things that we got going on.
Sure. So UMBC, in addition to being a classroom music teacher in Prince George's County Public Schools, I also am an adjunct course instructor at UMBC, my alma mater. So I'm really just full circle moment right now, getting to help people at the place where people help me.
Yeah.
UMBC is having a Create Festival, and when we were saying like, how do you get started? Sometimes you just need to see it.
Mhm.
Professor Brian Kaufman of UMBC and I are working to bring young musicians into a day-long festival workshop where they are bringing music that they've created with their facilitator, their band director, um, instrumental music teacher, and we're going to elevate that work as part of that festival, and then present it on a concert. It'll be on Saturday, April 1st at 5:30 is the concert. It's going to be in UBC's Linehan Concert Hall. And I believe it's Baltimore Symphony Orchids, the Baltimore School for the Arts Wind Ensemble, Booker T. Washington Middle School Brass Band, and the UMBC Symphony Orchestra. And then we have guest artists, Daniel Romaine and Diana Lawrence, who are going to be among the people, including myself, who are going to help these groups elevate their work. So if you're looking to see like some creation and what it looks like in action, and to really hear their process, that would be something great to check out. And there's going to be more information come out. So I think the best way to find it is to make sure you're subscribed to alerts from the UMBC Music Department. And you can just go to the website. And like I said, Saturday, April 1st at 5:30 is a great example of when young people create. And I teach at Rockledge Elementary in Prince George's County Public School. It's in Bowie, Maryland. And my kids are creating some things, and that's all I'm going to say. So if you ever want to see, I love having people come visit my room because I feel like I learn about myself from talking with other people about what I'm doing and its purpose. And you can see some of what we're working on. And later this year, we're going to present something that the students have created literally from scratch. And I'm very excited about it. And yeah, just get in touch with me. You'll know about it.
Yeah, I'm so excited I'm probably gonna take you up on that now that I have more freedom. I cannot wait to see the stuff that your kids are working on. And so I will make sure that I put the link to the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC. I'll put the link to the UMBC music page into the description on this episode. So those of you who are listening, either live with us or afterwards, on April 1st, you'll be able to come and see this exciting process, but I'll put the link so that people can know how to get in touch. Yes. Well, James, thank you so much. This was so much fun. I kind of want to keep talking, but I know that you and I will talk offline. That's all the people get for now from us, but I love this conversation. I could continue to talk about the path forward to a more equitable approach that wraps around all of our kids by being more integrated, right? Not being in a silo for literally hours and hours. So thank you so much for coming on. And having me. Yeah, thank you. I loved it. And so those of you listening in, also, thank you so much. Thank you to my listeners. And if you have not yet, make sure that you click that subscribe button on my YouTube channel and follow me on your favorite social media platform. I'm on all the places: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and right here on YouTube. And be sure that you share this episode with a music educator that you know also needs to hear this message. The best way to keep up with me and the work that my consulting firm is doing to support music educators all across our country and also internationally is to be on my email list. I send out my weekly notes email newsletter every Friday morning. And I also send out the blog articles that I write and also new episodes of this show. If you're listening to right here, the Music Equity Chat Show on Tuesdays. So if you're interested in joining that email list, you can keep up with the updates. Make sure you go to my website, which is just www.ashleycuthbertson.com. All right. Well, thank you again to James Dorsey and everyone out there listening. We will see you again next time on the Music Equity Chat Show. All right. Bye, everybody.
Everybody. Thank you.